I was going to do a little demo in Shootout with some Fuzz Faces that I have, two from Monster Piece and two from Analog Man. So I just wanted to kind of go over some of the circuits and history. And, I'm not an expert, but I've been a collector for about 20 years, and I've owned probably 15 or 20 original Fuzz Faces over the years. So I just want to go over this. I was going to try to do the shootout with us, but I don't think I have time to do the shootout and kind of the description. So if you want to skip over to the part two, which would be the shootout itself, and then I'll just go over the circuits in these and maybe some uh, info maybe I want to just pass on to other people with the best results I've had. So this first one is Monster Piece Classic. I picked this up on eBay, and I think I paid $60 for it. And it's a great sounding pedal. This is my first boutique pedal that I had, and like I said, I've owned dozens of Fuzz Faces, and none of them sounded right. I think I've had one over the years that was half decent, but the rest of them really didn't sound very good. This one has AC 128s in them, and if you do a lot of research, they'll say that the new market 275s are the only transistors that you should have in the fuzz. But I think if they're a match set and they're balanced right, you have just as good results with any other transistor. And we're talking about germanium transistors. I don't deal with the silicon too much. So the second one, I like this pedal so much. I had an enclosure, and I sent the enclosure to Richard over at Monster Piece, and he built me this one. And this one's a little bit higher gain. This almost sounds like a silicon fuzz. And I've noticed if I'm in a band where there's an extra guitarist, keyboards, extra vocals, this thing tends to cut through the mix a little bit, but the tone is a little bit different. It is a little more high gain, high pitched, and it's not quite as creamy, but it'll cut through the mix. This blue one, this is an enclosure I took out of one of the new Dunlap Jimi Hendrix fuzzes. And then I built my own fuzz, mostly new old stock parts, Allen Bradley resistors and Phillips capacitors. On this one, I did use Tropical Fish capacitor rather than the yellow Phillips. And then this one actually has the Jimi Hendrix mods in it. So I think there was two resistors that had different values, and I think it was the volume pot that had a different value too. And I believe one of the resistors that I replaced, Analog Man, actually replaced that with a veritable resistor. So this one, new market 275s and true bypass switch in it. This one is another one of my builds. This is more like what you find in a stock Fuzz Face from the early 60s, so all the components are basically the same. Again, Analog Man changed the one resistor to a variable resistor, true bypass. This was a Crest Audio enclosure that I had, and I just stuck it in here. Like I said, this is a Jimi Hendrix newer fuzz. I actually had a printer make up labels, so I was able to replace the Dunlap with one that looks more original, and then I relic all these pedals myself so they look a little more vintage. As far as batteries, you always want to use just heavy duty, non-alkaline batteries. I get mine at Granger. I think I had this is the brand they carry now, and I think I got the Rayovacs last time from Granger, but that's what I buy. I don't use alkaline. I don't use any type of daisy chain or anything like that because it's a positive ground on these. Um, so basically, germanium versus the silicon transistors. The germaniums are going to be a little mellower. They're going to be creamier, smoother sounding. They tend to interact a little better with your volume control. And the original fuzzes that I've had, they just never sounded right. And if you look at all these, they all have a trim pot. And there's a temperature that the transistors will run the best at. So you're able to control that with those trim pots. This one actually has two, and I can't remember. I think one's a bias and one's for the output. I'm not quite sure. It's been a while since I've opened this thing up, so I don't really remember. It's set. I haven't. I live in Colorado, so it tends to get hot, and then it's the winters it's cold. It can get change temperature 30, 40 degrees is pretty common, and I haven't really had to mess with the settings in the red one, the blue one, the Crest audio one. The only one I've really had to adjust is the one on the classic Monster piece, and that's the center dial. I don't have to adjust it much, but that's the only one I've really tweaked. It took me a while to get the blue one set up right, and now I haven't really had to do anything with adjustments on it. I actually drilled a hole on the bottom of the plate so I can tweak it without having to take the cover off. So the silicon, they tend to be a little higher gain. They're a little harsher. They tend to cut through the mix a little better. The one thing I don't like about them is if you use Hendrix as our vehicle of what we're trying to come up with, his sound, he's going from his guitar to a wah-wah and Octavia, and then Fuzz Face, and then a Univibe, and then his amps. That's no problem with the germaniums. When you put the silicone in that order, you get nothing but squeal, oscillation, I should say, and it'll pick up radio stations, and you just have a little bit more issues with them. They're a little more consistent. All the vintage ones that I've had that were silicone actually sounded pretty consistent, and I really didn't have issues with those. It was the germanium ones that half the time they didn't work. They sound good one day and they'd sound horrible the next day, and that's just because they didn't have any of these trim pots to dial them in. So that's before you go out and spend $800 to $1,500 on a vintage one, you definitely want to get some kind of audio before you plop that kind of money down, because chances are, if you read your history on them, Eric Johnson, all these other guys, they probably go through 20 of them before they found a decent one, and then sometimes they'd have to tweak that one. So you can get them to sound right. Send them to Analog Man. They'll tweak them, but they might have to replace some components in it. And then your vintage pedal isn't vintage anymore. It's usable, but it probably won't be worth what you paid for it. So I highly suggest checking some of these out. Before you spend money on a vintage pedal. There's some other builders out there. I've dealt a little bit with Kyle over at Chase Tone, and he's got a great product, fuzz and some wahs, and I hope to buy one of his one of these days and throw it in the mix here. Analog Man, it's a little bit bigger business, so you might not get to talk to Mike directly, but good communication with all these guys. Kyle, Richard, and the guys over at Analog Man. They're all very helpful. Before they started the build, they called me, checked out exactly what I wanted. Richard built the red one. I said I wanted something a little higher gain, and that's what he sent me. And those had the transistors in that one were TT 320 6081. I've never heard of them before, but when you hear the shootout, you'll definitely hear the difference. And I think that's just about it. And then another thing Kyle over at Chase Tone did, and I'll probably do a demo with that too, is I sent him one of my King Boxwas, and he actually installed a buffer. So I was actually able to play through a silicon fuzz, and I didn't have any squeal or feedback or anything like that. So if you're set on a silicon fuzz, there's ways to get around where you can have it hooked up the way Hendrix did and get the correct sound out of it. And I've tried putting the fuzz in front of the wah and stuff like that, and it just doesn't sound right. So there you go.